Welcome back to my channel, guys. Greetings from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I decided to add Amsterdam to my list of places to visit during this trip around Europe because I heard great things about it. Never been to the Netherlands before. I was told that it was perfect for just a quick weekend getaway. And indeed, I think a weekend is sufficient to really scope out Amsterdam because it's such a small city within a small country. The Netherlands is pretty small. And it was a 3-hour train ride from Paris, where I was before this and where I'll go back for a few days before continuing the rest of my journey. Before I dive into my experience here as a tourist, as well as the gay travel experience, first let me give some context on Amsterdam for people who might not be too familiar with it. There's two things about Amsterdam that I find interesting and noteworthy to mention. So the first is Amsterdam is built as this hemisphere city. So it's a half circle, kind of like a crescent moon shape. And in this shape, you have canals that outline the shape of this hemisphere. So basically you have several canals going parallel to each other throughout the entire city. So if you're walking a specific way, you will consistently see waterways every single street. That's a pretty neat experience. I don't know that I've ever been to a city like that. I think the only other city comparable is probably Venice, although I've never been to Venice. If anybody's been to both cities, I'm curious how they compare and contrast. Amsterdam is the capital city here in the Netherlands. A lot of people use the word Holland and Netherlands interchangeably. It's actually not the same thing. Holland is a region within the Netherlands. Actually, I discovered doing some research that it depends on the language. Some places do call the Netherlands Holland as the name of the country. But technically, at least in English, Holland is a region within the Netherlands. So there's North Holland and there's South Holland, and Amsterdam is located within North Holland. The other thing that's worth mentioning about Amsterdam, or really just the Dutch in general, is that everybody here speaks English. It's not the national language, they speak Dutch. But basically everybody learns English as a second language, more so than, I don't know, let's say Germany or, I was just in Paris and a ton of guys there also speak English because they learn it in school or whatever, but the Dutch are very disciplined with learning English, and it's because culturally, outside of the Netherlands, which again is such a small country, so few people speak Dutch versus, let's say, Spanish, right? That is found in many, many countries, or even French, you could say, you find it in other countries. The Dutch language is spoken by so few people that culturally, they basically master English so that both when they're abroad and also when foreigners come to the Netherlands, it's just a lot easier to do business, to communicate. And I find that so interesting culturally. And by the way, when I say their English is good, it's like nearly perfect. Like it's almost eerie how well people here speak English down to the accent. And I find this really fascinating because it tells you something, I think, about the culture, that they're not, I guess, so ego-driven to say, no. We're going to speak our language, and when you come here, you need to make an effort, right? Certain countries have that stereotype. I mean, I was just in Paris, and people say this about French people all the time, that French people do have, they're very nationalistic, they're very prideful. A culture where there's an emphasis on being adaptable to the international community, I think that's really cool. It shows, I think, discipline, work ethic, and malleability. I've never worked with Dutch people in business, but it makes me very curious how they are in business. Like, do those same qualities in the workplace, do they apply as well? If you have any context on this, please share in the comments. Okay, so back to the Amsterdam tourist experience. So I'm here in the summer. At the time of this video, it's July. This is peak season here in Amsterdam, and I feel it. It's very busy, very crowded. As soon as I arrived at the train station in Amsterdam, masses of people at the train station. I figured there must have been a lot of trains at one time, whatever. Not my first time in a busy train station. But as soon as I exited into the city central, even busier. People everywhere. And it didn't help that there was so much construction going on that obstructed a lot of the walking paths. So there were moments where I was literally stuck in pedestrian traffic, which as a former New Yorker was triggering my PTSD, that I was just behind tourists, like clogging up the walkway to stop and ask questions or take pictures or look at a map. So summer may not be the best time to come here. At the same time, the Netherlands is notorious for overcast weather, chilly summers, rain. The whole weekend I've needed a jacket here and it's been rainy. So I don't know that I would want to come here in the winter. I can only imagine how much more like bleak it is. Everybody's different with this stuff. Some people don't mind winter at all. So if you are that way, you should definitely come here if you want to come to Amsterdam. Come in the off season. But for me, I'm like, this is the coldest I'm willing to handle as a tourist. I've paid my dues with living in harsh winters in New York and so on. So walking through city central here in Amsterdam, I have to say I've been pretty disappointed. Not only is it super crowded and touristy, but a lot of the businesses you see are chains, and like the trashy chains, you know, like the Burger Kings, the Starbuckses, a lot of gimmicky sort of campy stores. Like I saw several of these in Amsterdam that would only sell rubber ducks. It's just like so gimmicky. A lot of stores like that. It just feels like a bunch of corporations came through and left, you know, traces of their stores and their commerce along the way without much unique, distinct Dutch flavor. I mean, the most Dutch flavor you see in that area really is a lot of fried food eateries, which I learned is like the Dutch thing, that Dutch people love their fried foods. So, you know, like Belgian fries. There's also this eatery I noticed where they have all these fried foods in vending machines. The entire eatery, like the entire store basically is vending machines that you show up to, you know, you pay with your card and it spits out a fried chicken sandwich or whatever. Pretty neat, like that is pretty unique, but you're not like, ooh, this is such a sophisticated city, you know? I of course went to the red light district out of curiosity. I did not see any sex workers there, like in the windows with the red lights beaming down on them as we sort of picture from movies and media and stuff. I don't know why I didn't see them. Maybe it was too early in the day. I was there. It was still daytime when I was out. I want to say it was like 5 p.m. or so. But even without seeing any sex workers, that whole area just felt very like grimy to me. Again, like city central, but even more, yeah, grimy is the word. Like, of course, because it's known for, you know, debauchery and sex workers, there's a lot of like peep shows and like sex shops and stuff like that. But even just in the crowd there, it just feels, I don't even know how to describe it. It kind of reminds me of when you go to Vegas and you're in a part of Vegas that feels very gimmicky. So because I was kind of turned off by these parts of the city, the rest of the weekend I ended up staying away from these more touristy areas, and I stayed in the outer rings, like the outer, if we can call them outer canals, slash even the area outside of that, which feels way more local and residential. So in a sense, it's less exciting and less dynamic, but it also feels more authentically Dutch, which is really what I cared more about, right? When you explore a new place, you want to see how it really is for locals, and you don't get that vibe in city central. It feels like the city central doesn't feel like a real place. I guess you could say that about a lot of other places though, right? I mean, Times Square in New York City is not at all demonstrative of the real New York. I mean, locals don't hang out in Times Square. I think maybe the reason though why it's more confusing here is because city central has all these old buildings and old architecture and old churches, and so you don't feel like you're supposed to be in a gimmicky tourist trap, and yet you are. Whereas I think a place like Times Square, you know that it's just like a visual stimulation overload place. Like people don't live there. So the rest of the weekend, I basically decided to stay away from all those areas. So much calmer, and it feels more authentically Dutch. Like you see it in the people around you, you see it in the businesses. It's the only place in the whole city. I went to a bar slightly outside of these like final canal rings, and I went to one bar where they greeted me in Dutch, which had never happened. Up until that point, first line of contact was always English because, again, they're used to tourists, I guess. Or maybe I just look like a local. I don't think I look like a local, though. To describe the local community, the Dutch are notoriously tall, lean, and flaxen haired, very light hair. The typical male haircut is like all the hair is slicked back all the way down to here. It's funny because usually when I travel to a place, I'm checking out the guys, obviously, being a gay person, like that's where my eye goes. And yet here, for whatever reason, I noticed the women. There are some women that I've seen here that are really beautiful and naturally beautiful and just look healthy. Whereas I actually don't find the men here that appealing. I feel like a lot of them are very unkempt, and the guys here just generally don't seem to take care of themselves as much. I was watching this group of friends, it was probably about 20 of them, at this local bar, the one where they greeted me in Dutch. And some of the girls in the group were absolutely stunning. And the guys all looked like generic frat boys to me. And I just found this dynamic so interesting. But I will say there's actually a lot of cultures like that, I feel, where the men don't feel any kind of societal pressure to look their best. Actually, I feel like Istanbul in Turkey is one of those places. I feel like Turkish guys generally don't take care of themselves. However, women in most cultures, right, feel much more of a pressure to look their best, be more healthy, and all those things. So since I'm talking about the men, I guess it's worth talking about the gay travel experience here at last in this video. As soon as I got out of the train, basically, I started seeing rainbow flags. So many rainbow flags everywhere, to the point where I thought, oh, maybe it's gay pride just happened or is about to happen. That is actually the case. I realized after doing some research that gay pride here is the last week of July going into the first week of August. So I guess I happened to get here at a time where they're preparing for gay pride, but I was really shocked by how many rainbow flags you see throughout the city. Usually most cities, when you see a rainbow flag, it's because it's a gay neighborhood or that happens to be a gay bar or gay friendly establishment. So they want to indicate that. This is like throughout the city, flags everywhere hanging from like the top of the street as opposed to like right above an establishment. I did check out the gay neighborhood here. It's not technically a gay neighborhood. It's really just like one block where there's boom, 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 a series of gay bars. There are gay bars scattered throughout the city though. This just happens to be a more concentrated area, and I'm probably going to butcher the name, but I'm gonna go for it just for the sake of this video. It is called Regulierdrechtstraat. I hope I'm saying that right. Regulierdrechtstraat. There's two cognates in there that I can pick up on. Régulier, regular, and straat, which is street. So kind of ironic that it sounds like they're calling the area full of gay bars regular street. That's kind of ironic. I was there around 8 p.m., 9 p.m.-ish. So unsurprisingly, some of the bars were completely deserted when I was walking through. But then one of them was packed to the brim. Interestingly, only exclusively with much, much older men. Most of them sitting on the terrace, which is why I could easily tell what the demographic was, as opposed to like, trying to look through the windows. When I say much older, I'm not talking like 40, 50 something, like all bald, gray-haired, white-haired. And I found this fascinating that it had to be at least 90% that demographic, this one bar. So I don't know what that's about. I don't know if it's a bar that's been there forever. Maybe it's the first of that area, because I do know in the West Village in New York City, similar idea where people think of the West Village as a gay neighborhood, but that's because it was the cool gay neighborhood in like, I don't know, when was Stonewall? Like 60s, 70s? So truthfully, even though it's thought of as a gay neighborhood, a lot of the locals who hang out at the West Village gay bars, there's one specifically, I don't know if it still exists, but when I lived in New York, I think it was called Ty's or Tyler's, where it's, again, exclusively much older men, and it's because it's been their local haunt for literally decades. So it might be that in this case, but I just found it fascinating because it just seems so random, especially next to these deserted bars. I decided not to venture in. I don't love super packed areas. I also don't love deserted areas, so it's kind of like Goldilocks. I was like, I I'd rather just find a regular bar that's somewhere in between in terms of activity. But the other thing is the packed ones with the terraces, everybody's just chain smoking, big smoking culture here. Not quite Paris level, but enough that I was like, I don't want to smell like nicotine. So I went on my merry way and of course decided to check out the apps when I came back to the hotel. Of course, it's hard to get a real gauge on the Dutch experience with gay men here because there's so many tourists in Amsterdam. There's also a huge immigrant community though, so you don't know who is actually local versus who's a tourist unless they explicitly say it in their profile. Some people might prefer that it's very international in that way, kind of like a New York or a London. But somebody like me, I prefer to really feel like I'm among locals and get that like taste versus feeling like I'm in a place that could be anywhere. And that's my overall issue with Amsterdam and why I think I haven't really enjoyed Amsterdam. I think I actually would probably prefer other smaller cities in the Netherlands that maybe feel more demonstrative of the real Netherlands and the real Dutch experience. Amsterdam to me is just too affected by the culture of tourism and immigration as well to really give you a true sense of culture here. It's funny because I was talking to a family member about this and he was saying that he likes Amsterdam because it feels to him like a city from the future. It's so bike friendly with bike lanes everywhere. It's more progressive and liberal in terms of sex work, in terms of marijuana. You see shroom shops around. You know, it's very international, very diverse. Basically, everybody speaks English, as I mentioned before. But interestingly, to me, those are also the things that kind of take away from a kind of authentic local culture. A lot of these things that people rave about are actually the things I ended up not liking as much. For example, and I know I'm just sounding like a negative Nancy at this point, I was envisioning with Amsterdam some kind of European utopia, I guess, with bike-only lanes. I just assumed naively that like cars were not allowed in most places because of these bike paths that it's notorious for. That's actually not the case. And I actually found as a pedestrian that it was very stressful not only looking out for cars, but also bikes going both ways, and also the metro that is above ground here, as opposed to like a subway underground. So there are some roads here where you really have to be super on it when crossing the street. It's interesting, after having this experience here, I read posts online, like commentary on sites like Reddit, and you see two distinct polar opposite opinions of Amsterdam. There are people who rave about it, who love it, and who feel like people who have the criticism that I have, like, didn't really get Amsterdam or maybe didn't go to the right areas. And then you have people who have the exact same experience I have had, where they're like, damn, I was expecting more. I was expecting something different, especially for the price you pay. And that's a detail that I did not mention earlier in this video. Amsterdam is very pricey. It's actually the priciest out of all the hotels that I booked for this entire trip in Europe. It was the most expensive nightly rate for hotels. And also just the meals are way more expensive than so far Paris, and we'll see with food in the other upcoming cities like Barcelona and Madrid. But my whole thing is, if I can pay more, I don't mind paying more. I'm not somebody who complains about it being slightly more expensive if I have a much better experience. That's my whole thing. Like, if I'm gonna pay more for a hotel, for food, I want to make sure it's something I haven't experienced yet, and I don't feel that way here. Maybe Amsterdam is a more optimal experience for people who want to engage in the more lax, the more liberal laws around like cannabis use and stuff like that. Maybe I'm just not the target audience for Amsterdam in that sense. It's kind of a notorious place for young men from other parts of Europe or just the world, I guess, to come together and engage in debauchery here. Although I do know Amsterdam really wants to move away from that stereotype because, you know, it doesn't make them look so great, and then they have to deal with, you know, jerks who come here and cause a ruckus on the streets. Let me know in the comments your thoughts. Again, if you've been, if you want to go, if you have more context on the Netherlands, if you've been to other parts of the Netherlands, I want to hear it all. Let me know below.